Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph. As always, I'm happy to be back with you guys this week. And I want to let you know right before we get into our true crime case that I will be reviewing those people who sent in their takeaways from last week's case. But I got to keep you guys on your toes. So make sure you stick with me all the way into the end of the episode, and I will feature those takeaways. I really appreciated the engagement with you guys last week. But let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today. Grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, but most certainly grab your wine if it's the evening. Either way, let's get into it. I've entitled this case, Who to Believe. And as we dive into this, you will see this is not the typical case we talk about on Murder in the Black for reasons that I know you guys will understand as we dig further into it. Now, our true crime case actually takes place in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a city that we visit a lot. And actually, I had the opportunity, and this is a shameless plug, I am not ashamed to admit, but I actually traveled to Cleveland, Ohio to participate in a true crime show. So I want to advise you guys to go and check that episode out. It happened right in the heart of Cleveland, Ohio. It is called A Plan to Kill. It is season 1, episode 3. So go check your girl out. But I want to say that Cleveland, Ohio, Atlanta, and surrounding areas in Atlanta, and I would say Michigan or Chicago seems to come up often here on Murder in the Black. And that's just some of the cities that I think has a very high population of Black people. And so that's the reason why we tend to go there often. July 14th, 1973, Melissa Latham was born, and she grew up in the east part of Cleveland. Now, according to her brother and also according to her, she grew up in a very disciplined household. Her father was a truck driver and her mother was a nurse. In her early life, she was very happy, energetic, but things drastically took a downswing in the Latham household. In the 1990s, her mother was addicted to drugs. And this drug habit changed the trajectory of Melissa's life forever. This caused her family to move frequently as they were trying to adapt to this new addiction. And in her mother's absence, Melissa sought affection, which is natural because you're trying to get what you can't get in your household, so you go elsewhere, and sometimes those are not the healthiest places. And at the age of 13, she found herself having her first child, with her second child being born soon after. Now, she later began to struggle with the same thing that she had disdain for, which was a drug habit. And very often we see this pattern happen, and some may call it generational curse, but this is definitely what manifested in her life. Something that took a lot from her in her childhood was the very thing that came to bite her in her adulthood. And so she dealt with addiction, and she ended up having a total of 7 children that she had to support. And so as she's battling her addiction and habit, she also has to figure out a way she can care for her 7 children. And she resorted to shoplifting clothes, which led to multiple short-term jail stints. And although they were short, they were frequent. And as a result, foster care got involved, and they ended up taking her children into the system. By Melissa's late 20s, which was in 2001, she moved from Oakwood to Cleveland. And from my understanding, Oakwood is like a suburb of Cleveland. It's not in the heart of the city, but it's very close by. And she began to find work off and on. And one of those jobs that she had was McDonald's. She worked there, and then she wouldn't. She found another job. And while she was not completely sober, she was definitely trying to get the ground underneath her feet, for a lack of a better term. Now, this is where our story really gets bizarre. And I even say it's not even a little bizarre. It's downright odd. April 21st of 2001, employees at a KFC restaurant dispatched a call to the 911 police department there. And they reported that a woman had burst into their establishment with visible injuries and stated that she had been attacked by someone who was attempting to kill her. Now, first responders and police officers were dispatched to the location, and they find out that the person who was in need of assistance name was Melissa Latham, and she was in shock. And as the 911 dispatcher recorded, she did have visible injuries. She was bloodied. She had a large laceration on her forehead and was bleeding from her scalp. Now, when officers arrived, she began to tell them her harrowing story. She claimed that there was a woman who was across the street with a male cousin, and they had just tried to kill her. Not only did they try to kill her, but they injected her with insulin. She also claimed that this attack took place in the basement of the home. Now, Melissa definitely seemed like she was in need of assistance, but they had to investigate her story, something that police officers have to do. It's just a part of their protocol. While they're talking to Melissa and writing down all the information that she is rendering, a woman burst into the KFC restaurant again. But this woman had the opposite story of what Melissa claimed. She said that Melissa tried to steal $1,000 from her and her cousin. And as this other woman is telling her story, Melissa is shocked. She completely turns pale and she hops the KFC counter where the workers are diligently trying to put food orders together for the other customers. And she claims that this wasn't the woman who tried to kill her. They identify the woman who walks in shortly after Melissa as Tonica Jenkins. Police really have a lot to put together, and they see that Tonica Jenkins doesn't have any physical marks on her, like scratches or bleeding. They don't believe her to be involved in the attack, but just by Melissa's reaction to her coming in, they knew that at the very least she was involved and would help them uncover the rest of this story. Police naturally start to think, is this a result of a drug deal gone wrong, because they're talking about money, and Melissa seems so out of it, and they don't know if it's a result of her being injected with insulin or another substance. They have no idea. And as they are trying to sort these two stories out, Melissa's condition begins to worsen, and they immediately put her on the gurney and rush her to the hospital. But before she's taken into the ambulance and the doors are shut, Melissa points at the residence, which was across the street, where she claims the assault occurred. Melissa's rushed to the hospital, and they continue to question Tonica to decipher whose story was true and if they would be taking anybody to jail that day. She claims that Melissa was doing a lot of drugs. I'm talking about days worth of drugs with her cousin, Kyle Martin, and claims that if anything happened sinister or something went wrong as a result of Melissa's injuries, well, it wasn't her. It was her cousin, Kyle. Now, immediately, she starts to disassociate herself from the attack that Melissa endured. They eventually and very shortly walk to Tonica's house, which is across the street from the restaurant, and she doesn't have a key. And they kind of find that a little suspicious, but nevertheless, she claims that she lives with her parents and they might have a hard time getting to the door, but eventually they were let inside. And upon entering the house, it became apparent that the very forthcoming person that Tonica appeared to be on scene was now disappearing. She was now kind of elusive and wasn't fully disclosing all information. They checked everywhere around the house, but they went to the basement, and this is where Melissa claimed the assault took place. And upon walking down the stairs, they noticed a strong odor of bleach. And we all know, being the true crime sleuths that we are, that bleach either means you're trying to cover an odor or you're trying to clean up some DNA evidence. And police think the same way we do, guys. They're experts at it. And so they are questioning what's going on in this basement. And when they finally get to the opening of the basement, they see that Tonica's mother was downstairs viciously cleaning the floor. So they say, well, what happened here? Why are you cleaning up so much? And she claimed that the dogs had peed, and she simply came downstairs to clean it up because she had grandbabies that would come down there and play often. And to first appearance, this story makes sense. But as they began to look further, they noticed that there's some blood splatter on the steps of the basement stairs. They knew that what Tonica said wasn't adding up, and Melissa's story was starting to be believable, and they were able to see evidence of it. Now, they immediately detain Tonica, and by detain, I mean they read her rights and say she doesn't have permission to leave as they are investigating what took place. And so they put handcuffs on her. The next thing they need to do is they need to identify who Kyle Martin is. It's unclear if they knew where to look for Kyle or someone tipped them off, or maybe Tonica knew where he was and told them, but they immediately checked the residence next door, which was an abandoned house. And that's when they encounter Kyle Martin. Now, Kyle was sweaty. He was scratched up. And unlike Tonica, who had no scratches, and although she was forthcoming but kind of seemed elusive when she got into the house, she didn't have those physical wounds. So they didn't know who to believe. They detained Kyle as well. And when they finally bring Kyle out to where Tonica was, Kyle and Tonica make eye contact. And immediately, Kyle tells officers to uncuff Tonica and let her go because he claimed that he was responsible for the vicious attack on Melissa. So they released Tonica, not because of solely Kyle's word, but everything kind of matched up to Kyle executing this attack. He had been doing drugs with her. He had scratches. He was sweaty. He was trying to elude police officers in the situation. So this seemed to be their suspect. As I told you guys last week, whenever someone is suspected to be involved in a crime, they immediately run a criminal background on said person. They did the same thing for Kyle. And they recognized that Kyle had an extensive criminal history. They were not dealing with a spring chicken here. While at the station, they decided to not allow Kyle to take them around the bush. They wanted to go straight to the forest. And they did an old cop trick. Now, one of the things that cops do, they play the good cop, bad cop. We know that. But they also can lie in some instances to get the perpetrator to confess, right? And I use the word lie very cautiously because although it's very clearly a lie, they call it something else. They use, a coax, a hoax, something similar to get that person to tell the truth. That's what they decided to do because they needed him to just come right out with it and say what happened. They tell him that while at the hospital, Melissa died. And this prompts him to do exactly what they thought he would do, which was to tell the truth and become cooperative. Now, his story would change the course of the investigation forever and really have us in a lot of twists and turns that I did not think we would be going on. According to him, his story really begins with how he met Melissa Latham. He said his cousin came to him one day and asked him if he knew of a woman that would be down to make some quick money through an insurance scam. And he told her, no, but what kind of scam is it? And she said it would be either medical or dental, but the more important part about the scam is that the girl who would participate would get paid, but also he would get paid as well. And now that he knew that he would be paid, it was like, I really don't even care how this insurance fraud works. Like, do your thing, just break me off a piece. He decided that since he didn't know of anybody off bat, that they should just go around joyriding in East Cleveland until they came upon somebody and asked them if they would be willing to make some quick money. And that's exactly what they did. They went around in the evening in a red mid-sized car looking for a woman who would want to participate and make some easy money. And that's when they encountered Melissa. They saw her walking, rolled down the window and asked her would she be down to make some money. And she, of course, agreed. Now, Kyle claimed that they stopped by, got some drugs, returned back to the house on Delmont where the attack took place. And the next day, they went to the dentist office. He claims that he did not go into the dentist office, so he has no idea what occurred. Inside, it was only Tonica and Melissa. Shortly after the dentist appointment was over, they got back into the car and they stopped again to get some drugs before returning back to the same house. This was a 2-day drug bender, if you will. He said when he woke up on that third day, things just didn't seem right. He was no longer comfortable with Melissa's presence. And she was in the bathroom when he first woke up. So he was a little paranoid. And then he checked his belongings and he noticed that $800 was missing and his crack. Now, in addition to being paranoid, he feels like his paranoia is confirmed that it was indeed Melissa who stole from him. When she gets out of the restroom, he strikes her in the head, in the front, and also in the back of the head. Tonica, who was upstairs, was surprised by the commotion, came down to investigate. And according to Kyle, he tells her everything that happened, that Melissa stole money from him, stole his drugs. That's when Tonica grabs a brick and strikes Melissa in the head. Not only does she strike her in the head, causing Melissa to fall to the ground bloodied, but she also injects Melissa with insulin, and she does it several times. Now, according to Kyle, he asked her, what is she doing? Does she think she's Dr. Kevorkian? And I think it's because I'm too young. I didn't get that parallel. I'm like, Dr. Kevorkian, is that some type of evil scientist? Y'all drop it in the chat. Let me know if that's an evil scientist that I'm just not aware of. Either way, he says he asked her, what are you doing? And she says, it's okay. I'm just trying to put her to sleep. It's a little bit of my mom's insulin. He claims that the scene was getting a little bit too crazy for him, and that's when he goes upstairs to get some air. Tonica quickly comes back upstairs minutes later and claims that Melissa got away. That's when he claims Tonica then took the brick and the syringe that she used on Melissa and threw it over the fence by the abandoned house. Now, investigators are like, what? Like, that's not what they were necessarily expecting to hear. It was a crazy story. But they needed to substantiate, was this the truth? And the only person that they could talk to was Melissa. They go to the hospital and speak to her. But they couldn't, because Melissa was heavily sedated from the insulin that she had been injected with. She had extensive injuries. She had stitches on her forehead and in the back of her head. She had 25 to 30 staples. Now, the main intent of insulin is to regulate blood sugar levels by facilitating glucose uptake into cells for energy and storage. Essentially, it's for people who have high blood sugar who need to have it regulated. Now, when someone has an overdose of insulin or is injected with insulin, as our good sis Melissa, then your blood sugar can fall dangerously low, leading to a condition called hypoglycemia. And it can have all types of devastating effects, even death. Now, her insulin was obviously very low and she was very sedated, so they could not talk to her. And at the very least that they were able to substantiate without talking to her was her injuries matched the story Kyle gave. And they were concerned after talking to the medical staff if she was even going to pull through after this attack. Was she going to make it? But thankfully, the next day, Melissa became conscious and she was able to speak with detectives. The first thing they showed her was a photo of Kyle and Tonica Jenkins, and she was able to say definitively these were the people that attacked her. She told the police that she remembered everything, which was something they were relieved to hear. And her story almost identically matched Kyle's, but not so much. And we'll unravel this. She claims that when they took her to the dentist's office, only her and Tonica were there. And that's when Tonica informed Melissa that she was going to make up a name to put on the paperwork. Now, at the time, this didn't mean a whole lot to Melissa. After all, she was just there to make a quick buck. But when she looked at the paperwork information, she noticed that Tonica actually put her name on the dental visit that Melissa was receiving. Not much was crazy there, at least at the time. Now, after the appointment, she claims they got drugs and went back to the house and did those drugs. The very next morning, she said that she did go to the bathroom because she wanted to brush her teeth, kind of wash up real quick. And when she came out of the restroom, the lights were off. So she kind of like speaks into the dark and says to Tonica and Kyle, hey, what's going on? Why are the lights off? And that's when Kyle swung and hit her in the front and back of the head. Tonica picked up a sledgehammer, but Kyle told her not to, and then she used a brick instead. She claimed that Tonica hit her in the head with the brick, but she didn't immediately pass out. She was trying to fight to be conscious. And then Tonica grabbed a brick and hit her in the back of the head, and that's when she fell to her knees. She then felt needles going into her body, and Kyle asked her what was she doing. Now, she claimed that it was her mother's insulin and she just wanted Melissa to pass completely out. Now, Melissa at that point in time was not unconscious, but she knew she needed to play dead in an effort to save her own life. So that's exactly what she did. She said while they thought she passed out, she was listening to them talking. And she said Tonica told her cousin, Kyle, that she, Melissa, was now his cousin, and she was going to give him her ankle bracelet and put it on Melissa. Melissa was now going to be Tonica. She claimed that she was going to take her to the abandoned house next door and burn Melissa's body, essentially saying that Melissa would be her and she would be using Melissa to cover up her own death. She stated that the only way police and investigators would be able to identify Melissa was through her dental records that she just signed her name on the day before. So Tonica and Kyle go upstairs to find something to wrap Melissa's body in so they can burn her in the garage, then place her body at the abandoned house. Melissa hears the door close of the basement, and that's when she got up and she used the end of a spoon to unlock the back door. Now, after she left, she encountered a pit bull, and she claimed that she was scared of dogs. But despite her apprehension, she proceeded because she knew this was going to be her chance at living. And that's when she crossed the street and entered the KFC. Enters the 911 call, so on and so forth. Everything we just heard at the beginning of our case. Now, Melissa's story gave clarity on what really took place, because really they got some of the story from Kyle, but not all of it. And it wasn't the robbery of drugs that they thought it was. This was now a murder plot. Detectives know they need to investigate Tonica Jenkins, but who is she in the first place? Well, she was another woman from East Cleveland. She was raised there with her two brothers and enjoyed a life of discipline because her father was a retired police officer. She was very close to her mother. She was viewed as the smart one of the family, the one who was always going to go on to do better things and be successful. She attended a couple of years of community college, and she applied to Yale for a graduate program in the neuroscience department. Now, being as smart as she was, she received a full scholarship with an additional $16,000 for classes and other things that she would need for her graduate program. Now, during her time there in the program, professors noticed that she wasn't able to perform at the level that most people would at this point in their academic career. She wasn't developing very quickly. So the professor actually reached out to the community college, which she formerly went to, in order to discover ways in which he could support her. How could he help her learn and do great in their program? And that's when a bombshell discovery took place. The community college said there was no record that Tonica Jenkins ever went to their school. What Tonica Jenkins effectively did was she invented a paper trail that made her out to be a neuroscientist. So when police hear of this story, they then go and pull Tonica's criminal history. And they find out that the ankle bracelet that was described by Melissa that she claimed Tonica was going to put on her ankle and then put her in the abandoned house, well, that wasn't an ankle bracelet that was used for an accessory. No, that was an ankle monitor, because in 1997, she was charged with fraud for getting those government funds to use for her graduate program she claimed to be qualified for. When her deception was discovered, Yale and the community college decided that they wanted to press charges for forgery and larceny. Now, the morning of her court date to be sentenced, she decided to not show up. But when she came back around, she had a very good reason on why she didn't show up. And the first person to hear this story was her lawyer. She claimed that when she was trying to come to the courts in East Cleveland, she was raped, drugged, and her car was used to dump her in Philadelphia. Now, this story seemed very extreme to her lawyer, but he tried to go along with it and make it work for her in court so that she wouldn't be sentenced harshly or a warrant wouldn't be put out for her arrest. But a couple of days after she came to him with this story, he also received pictures in the mail of her gagged and bound in what was presumed to be her trunk. Now, she claimed she had no idea where these photographs came from, but according to her lawyer, it just seemed all very fishy. You come to me, you claim that you've been raped, drugged, and your car stolen and you dumped in Philadelphia, but you don't stop there, or the story doesn't stop there, because then photographs appear only at my office that you were gagged and bound in your said vehicle. But Tonica's attorney was able to negotiate a really good plea deal for her to repay the money she stole from Yale and serve 3 years of probation. And the thing about this probation is it was very lenient in a lot of ways, because if she was to follow everything probation said for a time, then eventually all of her charges would be dismissed. But of course, our story doesn't stop here with Tonica, because Tonica's record revealed that after starting her probation, she was arrested again in Florida. Tonica. She was not only arrested by herself, but her mother was arrested as well. And this is where our story just gets deeper and deeper, because they were arrested for drug trafficking charges. Now, according to Cleveland PD, they spoke to the lead investigator there in Florida, and they found out what exactly took place. Now, the investigator in Florida said they were conducting a drug scheme to catch Tonica Jenkins in the act of trying to get drugs along with her mother. They set up a drug deal for 10 kilos for $100,000, and the women were supposed to bring the money when they came to the agreed warehouse where the undercover agent was waiting for them. Of course, the undercover agent has everything taped and waiting for them just to slip up. The undercover agent asked them, okay, we're here for the drugs, show me the money. They pull out the money, and a second undercover agent eventually is brought in, and the drugs are then given to Tonica and her mother once they give over the money. Tonica's mother taste tested the cocaine, stuck her little pinky in and tasted it. And let me tell y'all something. That is not something that drug dealers do. I know we see that in movies, but according to law enforcement, that just doesn't exist. It only exists in Hollywood. So for her to do that, let investigators know that they were dealing with two novice drug dealers, if we can even call them that. So soon after they make the exchange of money and the drugs, law enforcement makes the arrest, and they were charged with conspiracy to possess with the intent to distribute cocaine. They were facing some time, a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years, up to life. Now, they made their initial court appearance, and then the judge granted them bond, awaiting their sentencing. And they were required to wear the ankle monitor that we are now talking about. Now, Tonica's motive was clear. She wanted to fraud her way out of the charges she received in Florida, which is why she wanted to recruit a woman, kill the woman, put the ankle monitor on that woman, have the dental record so they could fake her death so that she wouldn't be responsible to answering those charges back in Florida. Tonica was clearly a liar, a manipulator, and a bona fide criminal whose behavior was only escalated with every opportunity presented to her. When she had an opportunity to not get caught up in the fraud and forgery charges after she completed so much of probation, she said, no, that's not good enough. I'm smart enough that I can go and start selling drugs, and gets caught in a drug bust her first time. But hey, she clearly was willing to kill to avoid going to prison. So based on all of this information that they had from Melissa Latham, substantiated somewhat by Kyle, and Kyle trying to disassociate himself from the crime, but now knowing that she had charges that she was awaiting, they were able to secure warrants for Tonica for attempted murder and her mother for tampering with evidence, complicity, and obstruction. Investigators go back to the house on Delmont, where they know they're going to find Tonica and her mother. However, both women were gone, and they soon discovered that they left to go to Florida to answer for their charges. And on April of 2001, they were found guilty on both counts in their Florida case, and the judge sentenced Tonica to 24 years, and her mother, Tonica, yes, her mother's name is Tonica. It is. I was confused for a second too, but her mother's name is Tonica. So they sentenced Tonica Jenkins to 24 years and 7 months, and they sentenced her mother, Tonica, to 15 years and 7 months. Police in Cleveland had to wait a couple of years to extradite the two women to Cleveland to face their charges. Both women were set for trial. 16 witnesses testified, and the picture was painted that Tonica was the mastermind, and Melissa also was able to testify about the trauma she endured that night. The defense didn't call any witness. They simply testified that Melissa's testimony couldn't be trusted because she was a former drug addict, along with some of the other witnesses that the state put on. They claimed they were just drug addicts. Their testimony was not reliable, and they couldn't trust it. Therefore, they should let Tonica Jenkins and her mother Tonica go. Now, Kyle eventually confessed, and they were able to use his testimony during the trial of Tonica Jenkins and her mother Tonica. And one day, Tonica Jenkins was found guilty of 2 counts of tampering with evidence, attempting aggravated murder, and complicity to commit murder and felonious assault. She was sentenced to 20 years in the Ohio penitentiary. Now, Tonica Clemens, which is her mother, was found guilty to her charge of tampering with evidence, and she was sentenced to 1 year. Now, you're probably wondering about Kyle Martin because he's as guilty as sin as well. Well, he was found guilty of kidnapping and was sentenced to 10 years. That is the case of Melissa Latham. My takeaway for this case, before we get into our takeaway from last week's case, I believe that the truth always comes out in the wash. A old adage that we've heard time and time again, but nevertheless honest and true. Tonica Jenkins thought she was smarter than everybody. She thought that she could get away with murder because she had got away with saying she was in school. She had secured scholarship money and $16,000 in additional funds. She felt like if I can get away with that and just pretty much get a slap on the wrist for that, then I can do anything. I can even murder someone. And I do believe that Kyle and her mother had more to do with the crime of Melissa Latham. And she also thought because Melissa was dealing with drug addiction that she was worthless and she had no value and no one would miss her. And I am just thankful that Melissa was able to get away and go on to conquer her drug addiction. So that is the story of triumph for me, a true crime story that does not end in the murder and loss of life that we're usually talking about when we get to the end of our cases. Let's go ahead and get into our takeaway from last week's case. Our first takeaway comes from Brian. He says, my take on the last episode, impersonating a federal crime agent, federal crime, kidnapping, federal crime, rape, torture, and burying someone live that ended their life. And only one offender gets the death penalty? Wow. As long as we killing us, you can pretty much get away with most anything. Black men executed, serving, or on death row for much less when convicted of crimes against whites. That's my takeaway. Our next takeaway are our comments left on Instagram. Brina says, this case was very heartbreaking. I can't believe all of this happened because of her brothers. Shaking my head. My takeaway, be careful how you treat people. Ultimately, her brothers' greed and them taking advantage of other folks led to her demise. This baby's life was cut short and she had absolutely nothing to do with it. Shaking my head, praying for her family. _Cream de la Crochet said, this case made my head hurt. She endured so much in her last moments. My takeaway, we have to be very careful of the thing we do and what we become involved in. We may not be the ones directly affected, but someone we love could be, and it will hurt much worse. We also have to learn from our mistakes. Don't continue to do the one thing that has already torn your family apart, because that means you have not learned from it at all. Agreed. That is our top 3 takeaways that we reviewed from last week's case. I highly suggest you guys go and look at last week's case, as it is very layered and deep, and I could not agree with you guys more, so I won't repeat anything that you've said. I want to encourage you to please engage with us. We asked for you to engage just by simply leaving us a comment about your thoughts about whatever case we've covered for the week. If you have any thoughts or any takeaways that you want to share with us, we ask that you do so. I love to hear from you guys. Continue to engage. I ask that if you like this episode, if you love it, please share if you care with friends and family. We are still trying to grow on our YouTube channel, so if you really love us, please subscribe. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black.